Okay, so my name is Russ McCullough, and I am the Wayne Angel Chair. I'm honored to serve as the Wayne Angel Chair of Economics here at Ottawa University for the last 9 years. I'm originally from Minnesota, so if you hear me hanging on to some of my O's, that's why. I think I've mostly worn that off a bit. Do I have any other Minnesotans in here? No Minnesotans. Okay. Vikings had a little rough weekend. The Chiefs did not, so that was good. They're my AFC team now, so after living here for so long. So I went to graduate school up at Iowa State University. I went there in 1993, and then in 1997, when I was all but dissertation for my PhD in economics, the guy who I was scrubbing toilets and mowing lawns and renting apartments for offered me a slice of his real estate business. So I jumped on that opportunity, conditional upon being able to continue to teach at the university. Our business office was just a half a block south, so I could go across, teach classes, and come back, mostly principles of macro and microeconomics. I got my real estate license and my broker's license, kind of ran a small sales operation. But we primarily specialized in college student housing. We had about 800 apartment units across the street from Iowa State. And so got involved in property management, and, new construction and subdivisions and flipping houses, and kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything with real estate. There was a site in one of our buildings that we were dumb enough to try to put a restaurant in. So I was co-owner of a Sports Bar and Grill restaurant, which had some good times and bad times. Things headed south when my manager started to like cocaine more than managing the business. So I got little tales like that of decision making that's important in businesses. There was a fraternity sitting vacant for a long time that we converted into a 13-room bed and breakfast boutique hotel. My wife's a horse person, so I'm a horse supporter. And we had a 50-horse barn that she ran, lessons and training, boarding, equestrian type stuff. So anyway, I always like to give a little bit of that background information so that you know, on top of all the academic textbook stuff, you get a little dose of what life is like in the trenches from me. And that's how I look at economics, is kind of the decision making that goes in day to day. Now, with macroeconomics, how many of you, this is your first economics class? Show of hands. And how many of you had me for micro last semester? Show of hands. Okay, so you can kind of look at where the hands are, so you can get a vibe on the way the class is going to go and stuff. And so I like to kind of try to bring some of those practical things. For macroeconomics, though, that's less about my direct business stuff, because the word macro is really taking a bunch of individual behavior and kind of adding up all their behavior, right? So we'll think more about the national economy, the United States of America, at the country level. Maybe it's a little more at the state level, but is there something to be said for prices in the economy? Are prices tending to go upward or downward? Maybe in Kansas they're going down, but maybe in other states they're going up. And so for the nation, what's happening with prices? And then the other big one is unemployment. Anybody know what the unemployment rate is nationally right now? 3.9. 3.9, too high. It was 3.9 like not too long ago, actually. 3.5, yeah, it just dropped again. I mean, it's been stable. It's really amazing from a economist's perspective, honestly, that it's persisted this low this long. I think we've really seen some underlying structural change for us to kind of persist at this 3.5. I mean, these are like 50-year lows. So that's kind of fun for macroeconomics to have a time in the economy where this is really unique that we're at this time. So we can kind of see, what causes unemployment. Should we be concerned? Is it possible for unemployment to be too low? Right? Are we shooting for zero? Those are the types of questions that we'll try to tackle in this class and kind of understanding it. And so our first step in doing that is to try to get our arms around what we're trying to measure with economic activity. So let me go around the room at this point here. I told you a little bit about myself. I live here in Ottawa, just a couple blocks away, by the way. So I'm now serving on the Franklin County Economic Development Council or something. I'm not sure what it's called exactly, but President Reggie's just appointed me as kind of the OU representative. So I'll be kind of looking at or serving on that board for the direction of Franklin County this term. We'll see how that shapes up. So I'm going to give your last name. If you can just kind of quickly give me your first name or your nickname or your shortened first name, however you want to be addressed, basically. Maybe where you're from and what your last job was. All right, so let's get started talking about the economy in general. So some of you have seen this because it's so important. You're going to see it in a little bit different way as we work through some gains. So I'm going to go a little quicker through this. Those of you that it's a review, I think it's a good review that if you had micro of the production possibilities frontier, because we're actually going to hit that for our international trade too. So I'm going to kind of touch back. So this will be a good reflection for those of you at micro, and then of course those of you who are brand new, this will be a new thing for you to start thinking about. So I want to think about what does it mean to have an economy. And so how many of you have seen Castaway? Tom Hanks, Castaway, great movie. He crashes the plane. I think he worked for FedEx. Where was my FedEx guy? That was somebody that was FedEx. Yeah, so I think he worked for FedEx, if I remember right, or some sort of delivery service, and washes up on the island. And so Tom, I'm saying maybe he could harvest some coconuts or do some fishing, right? And so is that an economy? What does it take to be an economy? We've got an island, a physical place. We've got a population of 1. Does Tom face trade-offs in terms of making decisions? Yeah, so on a given day, he's limited by time, right? So he only has a certain amount of time in a day, and so in that time, he can do one or the other. So he has to make some decisions for production and consumption. So what he produces is what he consumes. So we've got some of the things that we have in a big economy with lots of people. But I think we're missing an important element, and that is somebody else. So I think one of the foundations of for an economy, as opposed to a society, which maybe you just need somebody with a heartbeat to be a society or they kind of live together or something, is this idea that they're exchanging with each other, right? So let's say that Jen washes up on the island here, and they're kind of, starting to think, oh, wow, this is interesting, something new, something fun. And I put this up here, the mutual sentiments and sympathy, to highlight that Adam Smith, known as the father of modern economics, actually cared about morality and thought that the moral foundation and trust of a society is an important thing to have to facilitate a healthy economy. And so his first book that he wrote in 1756 was The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And so he's kind of a philosopher. Economics kind of didn't exist even since he was kind of the start of it as a field. And so he thought, how do we actually know about each other, or whether we're doing good or we're doing bad? We kind of need to bounce things off of each other. So this idea of sentiments back and forth. So the main reason I bring that up is that his more famous book that he's known for is called The Wealth of Nations. So it's actually called The Nature and Causes of a Wealth of Nations. He was curious, like, why are some countries poor and some countries rich, right? And we have that same question going on today. Why does the United States enjoy $60,000 a year of income per person on average, And other places around the globe, if we go to Africa, might be $2,000 per person on average. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? I mean, that's a huge gap. What causes nations to be poor and nations to be rich? And so that's what he really investigated, and that's what started economics, was this inquiry into the nature and causes of nations. So part of what we're going to look at today then is how do we create wealth? How do we create value through trade and production? So each person has to decide whether they want to do fish or coconuts, or both, right, if they split the day up. So let's say Tom over here can do 8 coconuts and 8 fish on a given day, or on a given day he could do 4 coconuts and 12 fish, right? So that's his production possibilities. Jen, on the other hand, on a given day could do 4 and 8 or 3 and 11. By looking at those numbers, at that data, what can you tell me about Tom and Jen?
Tom's better at getting coconuts.
Tom's better at getting coconuts. And what about fish? Jen's better at getting fish. Now, is Tom a pretty good fisherman though too?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we look, I mean, look, he can do the more of both, right? If we look at like this one especially, 3 and 4 and 12 and 11, I mean, Tom is just one of those guys that's good at everything, right? He can sing, he can dance, he's good at sports, he's super smart, right? Good at school. So he does just one of those guys that can do everything. And so Tom has what we call in economics an absolute advantage in production. An absolute advantage in production. And the reason I've set the stage this way is to say, if Tom's so good at everything, why would he ever want to trade with Jen? Right? If he's better at everything, why would he ever want to trade with Jen? And I'm using this illustration. This is actually the way David Ricardo, who was known for this absolute advantage, this kind of setup, is he went to the King of England in the 1800s. And he said, "Oh, King of England, Ricardo was more like Jen here. Oh, King of England, I know you're better at everything. But wait, I want to show you that it would still be beneficial for us to trade chicken and wine, right?" And so Ricardo went on to plead his case to the King of England. True story. And so that's what we're going to do here, is try to see if there's a way Jen might be able to do some trade still, or Tom would find it beneficial. We're going to start by looking at the trade-offs, what we call the opportunity cost of production for each person individually. And so all I did here is I graphed A and B, coconuts on the vertical axis, fish on the horizontal axis. And if we move from point A to point B, Tom has to give up 4 coconuts to get 4 fish. So if we do a little bit of math there, 4 equals 4, we can say 1-to-1 relationship, right? So 1 coconut costs 1 fish, or 1 fish costs 1 coconut. Either way you look at it, that's the trade-off for Tom operating individually. Now, if we do the same for Jen, her point A and point B ends up showing this relationship. She can give up 1 coconut and get 3 fish. Now, when you start looking at it that way, who's better at fishing? Jen, right? So if Tom gives up a coconut, how many fish does he get? 1. Jen gives up a coconut, and she gets 3. So in that regard, she's actually the least cost producer, if you will. She can do it in a least cost way. So 1 fish costs 1/3 of a coconut for Jen. So she's actually better at fishing than Tom in terms of what she has to give up to get another unit. All right, that's the notion of comparative advantage. So comparative advantage is what drives the potential for trade. And so if we were to kind of set something up maybe we should send Jen fishing and Tom harvesting coconuts and then exchange with each other, right? Wouldn't that be a good idea? So let's do it. Assuming this relationship holds on a one-to-one basis, Tom could max out at 16 coconuts, right? Just doing the one-for-one trade during the day. And Jen, on the other hand, moving from A to B all the way to C with full specialization, could get to 20. So we got Tom at 16, Jen at 20, and now our world production looks a little different than it did before. So I want to think about the world's production possibilities. So if both people went fishing, how much fish could we have? If both people went fishing, hypothetically. How much is Jen doing? 20. How much could Tom do? 16. So 36. If we sent everybody out fishing, we could have 36. Now, if we were needing a little coconut water to wash down our fish, who do we send out to harvest the first coconut? Which would be the smartest person to send out? Tom, right? So we're going to send out Tom. So this orange line here is really this line brought over here with the same slope because Tom has that one-to-one trade-off as we go up. Now, eventually, we reach this point I'm calling XC. And so Tom is tapped out at 16. And so we still might want more coconuts. That's fine. But, of course, we have to send out Jen now. So now we start following this production possibilities frontier, which is just Jen's slope brought up with that 1-for-3 trade-off. So this then does indeed represent the world's production possibilities. The world could be anywhere along there. And what's significant is that look at point XA. XA is simply adding up the numbers I gave you earlier. If Tom was doing his point A and Jen was doing her point A, so point A, we add them up, XA is where we're at. What's interesting about XA versus XC? That's a lot less of both goods. Now, do you guys tend to like more iPhones compared to less iPhones? Which one's better? 10 iPhones or 15 iPhones? Which one would you like better? 10 or 15? 15, right? What would you like better? 3 beers or 10 beers? 10, right? So in economics, one of our underlying assumptions is that you all like stuff more compared to less, right? It's one of our, what we call our axioms of choice, that more is preferred to less. And by the way, we always have the option for you to like give it to the poor. Like if you don't, oh, I don't need 15 iPhones. Oh God, I'm easy. You know, I'm not. I like my toys and I like all the apps and everything, but there's nothing stopping you from giving 14 of the 15 iPhones and send them off to somebody in need, right? So more is preferred to less. And that's what this is showing, is that if we have both people doing some of the stuff, we're not as well off as we could be with the amount of stuff on the island. And so this is about as close. There's an old saying in economics that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Have you guys heard that before? There's no such thing as a free lunch. And that is an old kind of economics saying that is referencing opportunity cost, that there's always a cost to doing everything. There might not be a monetary cost, but there's always something that you're giving up to get something else. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. This is about as close to a free lunch as we get, because just by having specialization in fish and coconuts and then trade, we can get to a point like XC where people have more things than they could otherwise do themselves. Kind of exciting. All right, so how do we come up with prices? So suppose Tom's sitting over here with the 16 coconuts. Jen's got the 20 fish. He throws out an offer. How about 2 fish per coconut? Is that a good deal for Tom?
Yes.
Yes. Is that a good deal for Jen then. She must be getting screwed, right?
No,
If
because
she's making the offer, she's getting screwed.
a fish is only 1/3 of a coconut.
Fish is only 1/3 of a coconut. So let's just kind of work through this here. So definitely, if Tom was to do it himself, if he gave up a coconut, how many fish would he get himself? One. So this is a good deal for Tom.
Right.
Right? Now over here, if I'm Jen, and he's offering 2 fish for a coconut, if she wanted to do a coconut, how much fish would she have to give up?
3.
3. So is 2 a good deal?
Yes.
But wait a second, I thought with exchange, there's always a winner and a loser. When you guys go to Walmart and buy something, so if you go out and grab a couple dollars here for a water bottle here, a Camelback, and Ava's Walmart, she's got the money. Didn't Walmart win and I lost? Well, how did I win? I just lost money. I gained something that I wanted, right? So there was an exchange. What is the value of this water bottle to me if I went to Walmart and paid $2 for it? $2. Wrong. What is the value of the water bottle to me if I went to Walmart and paid $2 for it? What's that? More than $2. Now, it could be $2. It could be $2, but it's unlikely $2, right? It's actually more than $2, right? Likely more than $2. Like, you know, it's kind of like if I would have went there and it said $2.50, would I buy it? Yeah, I wanted a water bottle. Maybe I was willing to pay $6 for this water bottle, right? So I go to Walmart and their price says $2. I'm like, $2, that's a deal. I'll buy it, right? And so now I have a water bottle that I valued at $6, and I only had to pay $2. So I kind of profited off of it in a sense, right? When we start to put it in dollars. So the consumer profited. Well, does that mean Walmart lost by only taking $2? Or are you pretty comfortable in saying Walmart made some money on that deal? Yeah. So maybe Walmart paid $1 to get that water bottle, and so they're up $1. So they're up $1, I'm up $4, right? So it created a win-win situation. A win-win. And so what often gets overlooked with the market system is all the win-win situations that we have day in and day out. This is the value creation. This is the wealth of nations. We have a country that encourages and has laws on the books to allow people to go out and do exchanges as they see fit in the pursuit of their own happiness. That tends to create more wealth and more income for everyone in the nation, not just the rich, by the way. So some of the things we'll do on the economic freedom stuff is that our poor in the United States, being a rich country, our poor are much better off, like 5-fold, compared to the countries that don't have a lot of economic freedom. Their poor, let's say, are at $2,000. Our poor are at $11,000. So our poor are 5 times well off in terms of water bottles, by the way, in terms of real purchasing power, in terms of like food that they can put in their belly and transportation that they can do. They're better off with that type of setup. Okay, so we got this win-win thing going on, so that's pretty cool. What if Jen said, I'll do 1.5? Is that still a win-win? If Jen says, I'll do 1.5, it's still a win-win relative to what they could do themselves, right? And so what we're showing here is that there's a window of opportunity for an infinite number of win-win situations. What is going to be the price range for fish, or for coconuts? How many fit? What's going to be the upper price that Tom could get? What's the most he could throw out there? 2.99999, right, in theory. So if it's 3, Jen's like, I can do that myself, right? So it kind of wrecks the win-win if it's not 2.99 or something less than 3. And of course, for Tom, the same thing. What's the lower bound? 1. Because if Jen's demanding, you know, a 1-for-1 deal or something, and he's like, well, I can just do it myself. No, I'm not going to be up anything. So between 1 and 3, there's a market now to where these two can negotiate a win-win situation, and it's definitely going to be win-win relative to what they can do themselves, right? And it might depend on who's the better negotiator or whatever, but we are going to end up with a win-win situation and a market price for fish, whatever deal they strike up, which might change from day to day. Maybe that can move to a different price on a different day. Okay, questions or comments there? We got a deal. All right, so now, getting back to the graph, so you're going to see this stuff in chapter 2, and then I'm going to kind of expand into it. We're going to take an international trade look to it as well. So here was Tom again with the old deal, 1-for-1. But now with the 2, check it out. He's got 16 coconuts. He gives up 1. He gets 1, 2. Right? Give up 1, 1, 2. So this green line now represents all of Tom's consumption possibilities. He can consume more than what he could produce on his own. That's a pretty cool result, right? So we can consume at levels higher than what we could do ourselves. Same is true for Jen. If she was to give up 3 fish before, she'd get 1, but now she gives up 1 and she gets the 3rd, or she gives up 3 and she gets up the 1, right? So Jen, or she gets the 2. Well, I lost track here. It might have. So all of her consumption possibilities lie outside her consumption possibilities. So the win-win situation is kind of being reflected here. If they negotiated different terms, the slope of this thing would wiggle around, but it would never go inside, is what we just said with the terms, right? And same thing here. This thing could wiggle around up to the 3 or up to the 1, so it could wiggle around the slope, but it's still always going to be outside what they could do themselves. So we have 2 winners. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right, so where we're going to go with the international trade is we're going to have the country of Tom, essentially, and the country of Jen, and kind of show how that makes countries better off in a little bit different format. All right, so what I'll leave you with this before we get to the next thing is, how does this thing scale up? Now, how many people watch Shark Tank? All right, so I like that show. My son and I used to watch it a lot before. So, you know, they're always wondering, well, how is this thing going to scale up? So we got Tom and Jen on the island, and economists, you know, kind of making some sort of a nice little imaginary wonderland. But let's talk the real world. How does this work in the real world? And so this is how it scales up, so to speak. The economy is about the households that live there, right? So we got old people, young people, babies, cool dudes and not so cool dudes, right? So we got all of the households here. And the study of economics is, how do we try to satisfy unlimited wants of people with limited resources? Unlimited wants with limited resources. So we'll kind of come back to that for a moment. Given whatever their resources are, these guys pursue their comparative advantage. Turns out to be about half of them enter the labor force, which we'll get into in this macro class a lot more. So about half of the American population is in the labor force. And so that's these blue guys, which means maybe for 8 hours a day or whatever, they join other people in the production of fish, and the production of coconuts, and the production of chicken wings, and the production of beer, whatever, right? So hopefully you guys are building up skills to have a comparative advantage in something, similar to Jen and Tom on the island. And now with the advent of the firm and modern technology, you're going to combine your skills with other people to help produce stuff. And then they're going to give you a paycheck. And you're going to take that paycheck back and go buy stuff, right? So we're right back to Tom and Jen on the island through the manifestation of production through companies and firms trying to serve the needs of the households. So that's how this thing scales up after Tom and Jen got busy and ended up creating 350 million people. Now, I suppose we could tell Adam Eve's story or something, but I usually don't go there. So, okay. All right. So, questions or comments while I'm flipping up here? Where does money fit in? Where does money? Where's my macro? There it is. Where does money? When do we get to talk about money? We are going to spend a whole chapter, by the way, on money. So Tom and Jen didn't have any money, right? They just had fish and coconuts. So where does money fit in? What's money in jail? Cigarettes. You've watched a few movies, right? So money doesn't have to be this. It doesn't have to be blessed by the United States government. It does in the United States. Actually, if you start creating your own money, you get thrown in jail. There's been cases of that. But money is not that. So money just helps facilitate trades, because it kind of gets awkward to say, oh, well, I'll give you 2.5 fish. Oh, I got to cut this fish in half. You know what I mean? So fish don't work very well for money. So inevitably, human beings, to try to facilitate trade, end up finding different forms of money. And one of the latest ones is Bitcoin that I'm not going to get into now, but something that's accepted as a means of payment. That's all money is if you're willing to take something as trade, not for the intent of actually smoking those cigarettes. Maybe you're not even a smoker, but you're holding the cigarettes so that you can go buy something else. So anything that's generally accepted as a means of payment by people in society is money. And so we'll head down that path later. For the start here, though, we're going to mostly be dealing kind of in physical goods. Sort of talking in terms of fish or in terms of coconuts or something else. So I like to think about the basic resources of the economy as physical quantities in buckets, conceptually. So here are the 4 basic resources that we identify in economics class: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So the land bucket goes far beyond just soil and acres. We're talking sunshine and rain, right? Any sort of natural resource. If you're a person of faith, I like to think of it as God-made resources, right? So God-made resources. Everything, if we just kind of plopped ourselves on the planet and we look around, we're like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff here, right? We got animals, we got wheat and grass and trees and all kinds of stuff, right? So land is our God-made resources, natural resources, everything that's out there at our disposal to use. And then labor is our amount of people that can go out and do some productive work. So it's not the population. When we start thinking about the labor as a resource, we're not talking little babies. They're good at pooping and eating, but they're not good at much else, right? And crying. But they're not good at producing something, being a productive part of some sort of process. So they're very much on the consumption part. So when we think about labor, we're thinking about people that are working or want to work, what we'll later define as the labor force. We could measure it in terms of labor hours, how many hours are people working, or it could be just the quantity of people, which is how we measure the unemployment rate. So that's our labor bucket. Our capital bucket is not money. So you might have came in here thinking, oh, capital, money, I've heard on the TV 1,000 times that maybe even in Shark Tank, well, Kevin, we came here to raise some capital for our new investment of this gadget that makes ink dry faster on paper or something, whatever, right? So that type of capital, that word or that use of the word capital is used by the average Joe all the time and often used in finance class. I think it kind of got hijacked, or the reason why we do use it that way is that historically, if you were starting a business, what do you need to start a business? You need to rent a building, get a machine, get a computer. you actually need to buy some capital the way we use it in economics class. So in economics class, capital is buildings, computers, equipment, pencils, man-made stuff that helps make other stuff. Man-made stuff that helps make other stuff. So we got God-made stuff, we've got man, and we've got man-made stuff. We're going to kind of lump everything into those categories for these first three buckets. It's kind of one way to conceptualize our resource base, our limited resources that we have. And then finally, this one's kind of a little bit of a wild card that we like to identify, and that's the entrepreneur. So somebody needs to kind of pool these resources together, right? That creative destruction thing that I talked about. So some sort of level of people, some amount of people that are helping to find something new in the pursuit of their happiness, perhaps, right? So the entrepreneur is beyond a manager. If we talk about pure entrepreneurship, a business owner who just kind of buys a business that was already operating and they own it and it just kind of runs itself. Maybe it's a fast food place or something. They're probably doing very little entrepreneurship in terms of the classic term. They're a business owner. There's nothing wrong with what they're doing, but it's probably more of a manager type function, right? The entrepreneur is somebody who's kind of looking for that new way, that new process, that new thing. It could be within their existing business. If they are being entrepreneurial, they're trying to maybe minimize cost and come up with something new. But that's who this is over here, is that is serving that function of kind of pushing the envelope and that creative destruction. All right, so that is how we start off. And how do these things change over time? How do we get more resources so that we can make more stuff? And so we can categorize variables, which we'll talk about in this class a lot, which I know is kind of foreign to a lot of you. We can talk about variables as stock variables or flow variables. How many of you had Professor Wagner's accounting class last term? Okay, so we have the balance sheet and the income statement. I know you didn't think you were going to get an accounting quiz in here, but so the balance sheet did what? What was on the balance sheet? Just give me a few items. Like, what were you keeping track of? Assets and liabilities, right? So assets and liabilities. So the value of assets, the value of liabilities at a point in time. And then the income statement was how you did this month or how you did this year, right? And so the flow of money as you go through time. So we can do that for really just about anything. So if we take the capital bucket, and maybe this is the number of computers for our company, right? So computers are capital in economics class. And so another variable that you're going to see in macro class is called investment, which means it's purchases of capital over time, which you may have also seen on the balance sheet in your accounting class. So if you bought $100,000 worth of computers, then on your balance sheet, you had $100,000 more of computers, right? So for econ class, I'm kind of thinking about the physical computer, actually. I mean, we can use dollars to measure it too, but the investment you can think of as a flow into the bucket. So if I buy more computers, the bucket level rises, right? There's a hole in our bucket, though, also. And so the hole is going to drain out. Some of those computers become obsolete, or they fall apart, or the software is old and they're just not usable. So there's a hole in our bucket, and so the balance of the flows is going to determine the bucket level next year. So if I buy 100 new computers, but I threw 50 of them out, then the balance of the level is going to be 50 more than what we had before, right? So that's kind of this balancing act that we have among variables. And we can do that for any of these things. We talk about the sustainability of resources, right? Environment is kind of big. And so if we have fossil fuels, we're harvesting a certain amount of fossil fuels that take 100,000 years or 100 million years or whatever to make. So we're draining that bucket. And so that bucket is just going down the more fossil fuels. Now, we can also look at it a little bit differently through discovery. Do we know where every single bit of oil is in the globe? Do we have some technology to be able to do that? No, we don't. So we don't know that there's not huge oil reserves right around the corner. And so if we think about it that way, one of the flows could be us spending resources for the discovery of more oil, right? And so once we've discovered it, it's like, oh, aha, I thought we only had this much, but it turns out we've got this much, right? And then we start using it again. So there's kind of different ways to characterize that, whatever that quantity would be, and with the flow and the activities that we do. Birth rate, little babies coming into this bucket, old people dying. Right? So we got the flow of death, the rejuvenation of birth. Right? So the fish stock in the ocean, death rate or harvesting of fish, birth of new fish. Right? So kind of keep that connection as we work through different things. We'll be kind of going back and forth between stock variables and flow variables. Okay, questions or comments on that? All right, so this little picture is kind of trying to bring you around to thinking about the physical production that's going on day in and day out that we take for granted. So every economy needs to answer three basic questions, whether they're communist North Korea, Kim Jong-un, or whether they're the United States of America. What are we going to produce? How are we going to do it? Who's going to get it? Those are the three basic questions every economy must answer. And so this ends up being the stuff that we want to consume that makes us happy, the final goods and services. Pizza, shirts, basketball, beer, chicken wings. And how does that stuff get made? We need resources to make that stuff. So this transformation that goes on day in, day out can be handled in answering those questions in different ways. So I want to think about a spectrum of running our country, kind of a spectrum of government. Spectrum of government. And so I guess one end of the spectrum would be no government. What do we call that? Anarchy. Anarchy. So no government. Anarchy. Probably a little wild and crazy. Probably not a place you want to live. And I always kind of used it as a, kind of an absurd endpoint. But it turns out that anarchy could be a better answer for your country. I don't think I showed this before. I think I know where it is. I'm going to show you guys this. This is kind of fun. So I went to a conference probably 6-7 years ago, and the title of the topic was Anarchy, ? Sometimes ? I'm like, that sounds kind of interesting. So I got his data here of Somalia. So there was an interesting place where Somalia had a very corrupt government. Right? So we're going to talk about corruption and economic freedom and stuff later. And so they were, the standard stuff. Kill your people, take all the money, international aid comes, take it all, whatever. So Somalia was in a bad place. And eventually, that got overthrown, but nobody replaced it. So it's one of the few countries in the world where it was actually anarchy from 2000 to 2005. And so what do people do when it's anarchy? Well, they set up their own, security systems and policing systems internally. There's just no organized central government that's kind of running things, right? They just kind of were on their own. And so what was interesting here is gross domestic product, which we're going to learn is income, which is kind of wild card for measurement is why I put that, but life expectancy was improved with anarchy. 1-year-olds fully immunized, physicians, infants with low birth, infant mortality rate, maternal mortality, population with access to drinking water, access to sanitation, population with access to one health facility, extreme poverty, radios, telephones, TV, facilities due to measles, adult literacy. All of that stuff, exception being adult literacy and combined school enrollment, improved. So in a lot of ways, anarchy was potentially superior to a corrupt government being in place. So even anarchy might be an option depending on a country's circumstances. They, of course, later then developed a government, and I haven't kept track on where it went from there. Although I know Somalia is not a super great place to be, if I remember right. So hopefully things are going better. So no government or one person controls everything. What do we call the one person everything? A dictator, right? And this would be even kind of a special case of a dictator. Like the dictator literally called all the shots, made all the decisions, everything. In reality, even in North Korea and Castro down in Cuba, there's a collection of people that make decisions, right? So they're kind of working together in some way, shape, or form. So for the most part, this doesn't exist in the real world. This doesn't exist in the real world. The real world is somewhere in between. But I like to set it up this way so that we can start to think about how we run things. As we move down this end of the spectrum, we start to get more and more into individual decisions and property ownership or property rights. And as we move down this end of the spectrum, we start to have more collective decisions and collective ownership of property. So if we bring it to its extreme, it's very few people owning everything, right? Coming this way, there is no central government that owns anything collectively. Everything's on the individual. So where do we want to live? Well, might depend on who's running it and how they're doing, right? And how well they do it. So what we found is that places where there's more individual freedom and economic freedom ends up giving those better outcomes that we have. So generally, capitalism and economic freedom are to the left side here. And as we move this direction, we get more into socialism or communism. So communism was kind of the ultimate, the government owns everything, and we're all just kind of kumbaya by the fire and make decisions together and collectively, and hopefully everybody's better off. Well, Stalin, I can't remember what the death rate was, maybe, or the death quantities, maybe 20 million or something was Stalin, of their own people dying. Venezuela is a complete mess right now with their collective decisions. So anyway, I've got a lot of good data over the years. Hitler, didn't even talk about him, you guys remember him? That's probably moving this direction, right? So that is kind of the spectrum that we have. Now, there's other governments that have a little bit bigger role in things, in Denmark and some of our other countries. Those countries, shockingly enough, are far from socialist, actually. There's a really healthy, vibrant market system. They are high on the economic freedom if we go to Denmark, places where there is free education and some free healthcare. Hong Kong, #1 on the list in economic freedom, has actually free healthcare. So don't be misled into thinking that there's not market economies going on in some of those other places, because there is. And that's generally why they've been prosperous, is that they're moving a little more into this area. even if the government does play a bigger role maybe in some areas, there's other areas that Denmark, for instance, might be better in terms of helping businesses start up and having more freedom to do things. Okay, so that's kind of this spectrum, and that you start to see how, depending on who owns what, these questions are going to be answered a little bit differently. So, what are we going to produce? By the way, those of you who are new, I'm really, I'm sorry, but I'm just really bad. Everybody's bad at some stuff, right? I'm bad at letting class out. So pretty much plan 12:40. I'm also pretty good about not keeping you late, or whatever. So I'll pretty much cut off. But so don't pack up too early. We'll end up going until 12:40 here pretty much every time. What are we going to produce? Who makes that decision in a more market-based economy? What do we make? The individual consumer, right? So the consumer ends up being the king. So back in the old days, the king and the queen, we're back over here to this dictator level, right? The king and the queen own everything, and they make all the decisions of, well, we should make this, we should make this would be better for you. And those places where the government owns more of the vital resources and the bigger resources in the economy, they're making those decisions. But in a market-based economy, the what question is really being determined by the consumer. Because what do businesses want to make? What do businesses want to make? Money, right? So they're there to kind of serve the consumer. They are the peasants in a sense. If the system's working right, they're there to try to sell stuff to the consumers. What do you want, consumer? I want this. Okay, well, let me see if I can make it for you, right? Or maybe in the case of like a Steve Jobs, you don't even know that you want this, right? So there's the innovation part. Like they come up with a new thing. Like you don't even know that you're going to like listening to music on something like this back in 1989, right? And so he takes things to another level on serving the consumer. How about the how question? How should we make something? I want to give you an example of me when I was in your chair many moons ago. I went to Mazatlan for spring break. Anybody got a Mexico trip for spring break time? Nobody does that. Don't you guys want to have fun? Oh, you did it before. Okay, so Taylor had her fun a couple years ago. Well, okay, so I go to Mazatlan and I'm sitting in a restaurant having breakfast the next morning, probably a little hungover, and I look across the street and there's a hotel there. And there's 3 guys with 3 sickles. You know what a sickle is? Kind of Grim Reaper type looking thing, you know, with the big blade. There's 3 guys with 3 sickles, and they're doing this. What were they doing? Cutting the grass. Yeah, good. Many of you said you were mowing lawns or whatever, cutting the grass. Now, if I would have went to Daytona Beach for spring break, and I looked across at the hotel, how would the lawn be getting mowed in the United States? One guy, one lawnmower, right? So one machine. So what's the cause of that? How do we get things done? It ultimately ends up being determined by the quantity of resources in your economy. Like what stuff do you have? In the United States, we have a lot more machines per person than what Mexico has. In Mexico, there's more labor. So it's not just about, well, labor's cheap down in Mexico. Of course it's doing so. No, why is it cheap? It's because labor is abundant relative to machines. And so the quantity of resources in each country ends up playing a role on how things get done. All right, good job for first day. We'll see you on Wednesday.